Welcome to the Secret of America, where we bring to light the stories that dwell in the darkness. Tonight's story leads us to the peaceful town of Millbrook, where a beloved family's hidden truth turned everything upside down. This is the story of a town that adored the Bishopsons, right up until the moment the well behind their residence was drained. The kind of darkness that conceals itself behind a smile is frequently the most frightening of them all. Not the beast that snarls and flashes its fangs, but the one that brings you freshly baked cookies, never forgets your birthday, and assists your children with their school assignments. The terror that waits behind gentle eyes and generous gestures. The wickedness that arrives without any forewarning, but bearing a gift for your new home and an offer to help out at the neighborhood school. This narrative centers on that kind of darkness, one that nestled itself into the core of a community and made itself comfortable. A darkness that didn't arrive with booming thunder and flashing lightning, but with pancake breakfasts and floats in the 4th of July parade. A darkness that the citizens of Millbrook failed to identify until the moment for action had long passed. Before we start this exploration into the shadows of everyday life, a brief warning is necessary. The material ahead may unsettle you, not because it's filled with gore or supernatural elements, but because it raises the most unsettling question imaginable. How deeply do we truly understand the people we invite into our lives? The person next door who tends to your plants when you're on holiday. The household whose kids play alongside yours. The familiar faces you encounter daily and never once think to doubt. The incidents you're going to hear about develop like a nightmare that starts as a lovely dream. A story meant as a warning about trust extended without careful thought, and clues ignored without a second glance. It serves as a reminder that occasionally, the actual monsters aren't lurking beneath the bed or inside the wardrobe. They're seated across from you at your dining table, handing you the salt and inquiring about your day. The village of Millbrook, situated among gently rolling hills and thick woodlands, remote from the turmoil of metropolitan existence. With slightly more than 3,000 inhabitants, it was the sort of place where everybody knew everybody else, where Independence Day cookouts united the whole population, and where an unfamiliar face couldn't walk along Main Street without receiving at least 12 greetings. Millbrook took great satisfaction in its tight bonds among neighbors, its historic buildings dating from the 1800s, and above all, its feeling of mutual reliance. The village had that flawless quality that made it appear destined for a souvenir postcard or a holiday film. Streets lined with maple trees, their foliage forming a brilliant overhead tapestry of red and gold during the fall. The central square included a bandstand hosting evening concerts during summer months, and an antique clock tower that had counted the hours for successive waves of Millbrook families. Main Street featured locally owned shops, a hardware store handed down through 4 generations, a bakery renowned for its crusty sourdough loaves, a bookstore with floors that creaked, and the permanent aroma of old pages and fresh coffee. Time progressed at a different speed in Millbrook. While the wider world hurried forward at a breakneck pace, existence here preserved a steady rhythm characterized by seasonal celebrations, Friday night football contests, and the well-known patterns of village living. Wrongdoing was almost absent. Sheriff Jim Caldwell's main worries usually consisted of adolescent mischief or occasional arguments between property owners about boundary markers or barking canines. It was the sort of place where locking your doors at night seemed unnecessary. Sheriff Caldwell would later remember, his voice carrying both fondness and regret. People left their keys in their vehicles. If somebody required something, they'd take it and bring it back accompanied by a thank You note, or some homemade cookies. We had faith in each other because we were familiar with each other. At least that's what we believed. That confidence, that deep-seated certainty that the people around you were essentially honorable individuals, was what characterized Millbrook. It also rendered the town especially susceptible to what was approaching. When the Bishopsons showed up in Millbrook during the spring of 2018, the town greeted them with open arms. Thomas and Eleanor Bishopson, together with their two offspring, 15-year-old Abigail and 12-year-old Oliver, moved into the aged Victorian residence on Willow Lane. The house had sat unoccupied for close to 10 years after the earlier inhabitants. The elderly Crawfords passed on without any relatives to take over the estate. The Bishopsons proved to be the ideal addition to Millbrook's community picture. Thomas, a prosperous remote software engineer, swiftly established himself as a generous supporter of neighborhood shops. He'd spend extended periods at Mabel's Cafe buying coffee for anyone who came in while he did his work on his laptop. Eleanor, a previous art educator, gave her time at the nearby elementary school, bringing imagination and color to the youngsters' learning. The Bishopson children were just as charming. Abigail joined the secondary school debate squad and guided them to the state finals in her initial year. Oliver became recognized for his gentle disposition, frequently seen giving assistance to senior neighbors with carrying groceries or cutting their grass. The Bishopsons seemed like an answer to our prayers. Remembered Martha Winters, who ran the neighborhood bakery. Eleanor would stop by each Saturday morning to get fresh sourdough, and she consistently had time to hear about my difficulties. When my arthritis worsened to the point I couldn't work the dough properly, she put together a fundraising event for my healthcare costs. They gathered sufficient funds for me to receive the necessary treatment and to bring on an assistant. That's simply the sort of people they were, caring, considerate individuals who appeared to truly care. Sheriff Jim Caldwell expressed a similar view. Across my 30 years of police work in Millbrook, I'd never witnessed a family blend so smoothly into our society. Thomas would set up these technology sessions for the senior citizens, instructing them on video, calling their grandchildren, or handling their finances online. He never made anybody feel unintelligent for lacking knowledge. He had this manner about him, patient and understanding. The Bishopsons' Victorian house on Willow Lane was rapidly changed from a decaying eyesore to the neighborhood's most admired property. Thomas and Eleanor invested their funds into bringing the house back to its original splendor, repainting the detailed gingerbread trim with vivid colors, replacing shattered stained glass windows, and developing an English-style garden that attracted admirers from multiple surrounding counties. Behind the residence, partly concealed by a cluster of aged oak trees, sat an ancient stone well. It was a leftover from the period before Millbrook acquired a public water supply, a charming historical element that enhanced the property's appeal. The well was closed off with a sturdy timber lid, which Thomas strengthened not long after moving in, mentioning safety worries about the neighborhood youngsters who frequently played in their large backyard. That well was extremely old, said Harold Jenkins, Millbrook's informal historian, going back to the 1850s when the land was initially held by Millbrook's originator Jeremiah Mill. Folklore claimed the water from that well possessed unique qualities. Some said it had a sweeter flavor than any other water in the region. Others maintained it had curative powers. Older residents used to speak about how animals that drank from it survived longer, produced increased milk. Simply old tales naturally, but the Bishopsons seemed fascinated by those accounts. Thomas questioned me extensively about the well's background. For close to 3 years, The Bishopsons formed the central core of Millbrook. They threw elaborate Halloween parties that the whole town was invited to. Their Christmas illumination presentation turned into a regional site. Thomas created a scholarship fund for Millbrook High School students continuing into science and technology professions. Eleanor started an art therapy initiative for at-risk youth. The Bishopson children excelled academically and in after-school activities, turning into examples for their contemporaries. Those were wonderful times, recalled Principal Donna Fletcher of Millbrook High. Would never experience such engaged guardians. They showed up at every school function, gave their time for every group. When our computer facility required updates, Thomas not only gave the hardware, but set it up himself and educated our personnel. When the theater department needed outfits for the spring performance, Eleanor stayed up for evenings creating and sewing them. They were present everywhere, assisting everyone, requesting nothing back. But underneath the exterior of this flawless family image, minor peculiarities started to appear. Watchful inhabitants observed strange tendencies in the Bishopsons' conduct. They never allowed anyone inside their residence beyond the first floor. The upper two floors, featuring their decorative curved windows and perpetually closed drapes, stayed inaccessible to guests. During their lavish outdoor parties, attendees would sometimes catch Thomas or Eleanor slipping away to verify something inside the dwelling, reappearing moments later with manufactured smiles and indefinite explanations. I recall asking Eleanor whether I could use their upstairs restroom during a garden party, said Diane Lewis, who instructed alongside Eleanor at the grade school. The one downstairs had a queue. She paused momentarily, then dismissed it with a laugh, mentioning the upstairs was chaotic due to their remodeling project. She practically pulled me toward the pool house to use that restroom instead. It seemed odd to me, but I didn't give it much consideration at the moment. Everyone deserves some privacy. Another oddity was the Bishopsons' determination to manage their own waste disposal. They declined to link to Millbrook's sewer network, mentioning the historic importance of keeping the property's authentic systems. They had a private firm deliver substantial quantities of chemicals on a monthly basis, which Thomas clarified were for managing their septic system and the swimming pool they had put in the backyard. The chemical deliveries appeared excessive, observed Roger Wilson, who lived across the street. I worked in pool care for 20 years before stopping, and I understand the quantity needed for a household pool. They were getting 5, maybe 6 times that quantity, but Thomas had a justification for everything, something regarding the particular pH balance of their earth needing special handling. He was an intelligent individual, used plenty of technical language. Who was I to challenge him? The Bishopsons were also recognized for their regular journeys. Every couple of months, the household would vanish for a week or two, giving different reasons for their absences, visiting Eleanor's unwell mother in Oregon, attending tech gatherings for Thomas's job, taking educational outings for the offspring. They consistently came back with gifts for their neighbors and intriguing tales of their adventures. Looking back, their departures consistently matched times when individuals started raising too many inquiries. Sheriff Caldwell later considered when the environmental inspector received grievances about strange smells coming from their land. Unexpectedly, the Bishopsons were gone to Yellowstone for a family holiday. When neighbors mentioned hearing odd sounds during the nighttime, the household took an unplanned excursion to Europe for a month. We never linked the evidence until it was too late. Despite these oddities, the town's respect for the Bishopsons stayed unwavering. They had contributed so much benefit to Millbrook that any eccentricities were readily excused or explained away. If they appreciated their privacy, if they had unusual pastimes or interests, what did it signify? They were giving, kind, and appeared to truly worry about the welfare of the society. It wasn't until the unusually intense rainfall of October 2021 that the reality started to surface, in a very literal sense. The storm that struck Millbrook that autumn was without parallel. Over 2 weeks, the town got the comparable of 6 months' worth of rain. Streams overflowed, basements took on water, and the earth became soaked, incapable of taking in additional moisture. On Willow Lane, the circumstance was especially severe. The terrain of the area meant that water ran downhill toward the Bishopsons' land, gathering in their rear garden where the old well was situated. On the night of October 17th, while the rain kept hammering against window panes and thunder rattled the foundations of houses, a sinkhole developed around the ancient well behind the Bishopson residence. The waterlogged earth, combined with whatever structural damage had happened to the well, throughout the years, gave way. The heavy timber cover that Thomas had installed fell inward, and the walls of the well started to break apart. By morning, neighbors detected an unusual odor spreading through the air. A cloyingly sweet, rotting smell that appeared to come from the Bishopson land. Anxious calls flooded the sheriff's office, but the Bishopsons themselves were absent. Their automobiles were gone from the driveway. Their phones went straight to voicemail, and their normally quick replies to community communications were noticeably missing. I realized something was incorrect when Eleanor didn't appear for our morning walk, said Beatrice Hammond, who resided next door. In 3 years, she'd never missed it without phoning ahead. Then I detected that horrible odor. It was like nothing I'd ever come across, like decay and chemicals combined. I contacted the sheriff straight away. Sheriff Caldwell got to the Bishopson property with 2 assistants around 9:00 a.m. What they found in the backyard would trouble them and the village of Millbrook for years ahead. The old well had partly collapsed, making a broad opening roughly 8 feet across, but it wasn't a normal well anymore. The original stone shaft extended down approximately 20 feet before opening into what appeared to be a human-made chamber. As the floodwaters pulled back, they had uncovered a shocking sight that defied logical explanation. I've worked in law enforcement for 30 years, Sheriff Caldwell would later state in court. I've witnessed car crashes, killings, natural deaths, and bodies in every stage of decay. Nothing prepared me for what we discovered in that well. The space beneath the Bishopson land contained the remains of at minimum 17 people in different phases of decomposition. Some were barely more than skeletons, indicating they had been there for years, perhaps before the Bishopsons' arrival. Others were newer, still identifiable. Most disturbing were the signs of organized efforts to preserve them. Bodies placed in chemical baths, others covered in plastic, with rough tubing systems connected, apparently meant to move the preserving substances. The sheriff right away declared the location a crime scene and summoned the State Bureau of Investigation. As word spread across Millbrook, shock and refusal to believe turned into terror and feelings of betrayal. The household that had been accepted, honored, and adored by the whole community was unexpectedly exposed as hiding unimaginable mysteries. As investigators meticulously searched the Bishopson residence, the complete scope of the household's dishonesty emerged. The locked upper floors had been changed into a gruesome workspace. Notebooks recorded Thomas and Eleanor's tests in human preservation and revival. Photos documented their labor, displaying the development of their methods. Most chilling were the sound recordings. Countless hours of video and audio where the Bishopsons dispassionately discussed their test subjects, their procedures, and their unsuccessful attempts. The most disturbing element wasn't just the proof of murder, explained Special Agent Lena Rodriguez, who directed the FBI investigation. It was the emotionless distance with which they handled it. These weren't impulsive crimes or even conventional serial killings driven by psychological needs. The Bishopsons were performing what they considered scientific study. They perceived their victims as materials, examples to be examined. The inquiry showed that the Bishopsons had been working for nearly 10 years before showing up in Millbrook. Their approach was predictable. They would relocate to a small, closely connected community, fit in, earn confidence, and then start selecting victims. Typically, these were travelers going through the area, homeless people, or others whose disappearances could go unnoticed or unexamined. In certain instances, they had drawn in victims by providing employment, shelter, or aid. The Bishopson children introduced a particularly upsetting element to the situation. Initially considered possible victims themselves, exposed to a lifetime of mental conditioning by their guardians, investigators quickly uncovered proof indicating they were willing contributors to the household's operations. Abigail's academic compositions, seemingly innocent investigations of the concept of death and transcendence, gained sinister interpretations when viewed in the framework of what had been occurring in her residence. Oliver's comprehensive anatomical sketches, commended by educators for their exactness, were acknowledged by investigators as examinations of real victims. We discovered journals belonging to both children. Agent Rodriguez disclosed they recorded their teachings from their guardians, describing in depth what they absorbed about biology, chemistry, and what they called the conservation of human spirit. They documented about picking targets during household journeys, how they helped attract them using their innocent looks. These youngsters weren't blameless onlookers. They were trainees. As the inquiry widened, officials found that the Bishopsons' periodic excursions weren't getaways, but rather transfers of their enterprise. They kept comparable properties in 3 additional states, each with its own altered well or underground construction. The overall victim total across all sites eventually reached 43 verified people with proof indicating there could be more. The town of Millbrook, once pleased with its communal spirit and shared confidence, was broken. Residents who had accepted the Bishopsons, who had taken their assistance and companionship, now doubted their own discernment. How could they have overlooked the indicators? How could malevolence have resided among them, smiled at them across eating tables, taught their offspring, and arranged their fundraising activities? I keep thinking about all the occasions they were inside my residence. Martha Winter expressed, her tone cracking. Eleanor would bake with me in my kitchen. She borrowed my grandmother's rolling pin. Thomas repaired my computer while sitting at my dining table. Oliver played with my feline. They occupied my home during all that period. What if I had been the next one? What if they had determined I would make an appropriate specimen for whatever distorted test they were performing? The pursuit for the Bishopson family became one of the largest in the state's past. Their images appeared on news programs nationwide. Their cars, bank records, and known contacts were watched. Border authorities and worldwide organizations were notified. Yet, as days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, the Bishopsons seemed to have disappeared without a clue. It wasn't until 14 months after their vanishing that the initial confirmed observation happened. A service station security camera in northern Montana captured pictures of Thomas and Eleanor buying supplies and fuel. By the moment authorities reached the location, they were far away, presumably heading toward the Canadian boundary. The children were not observed with them, raising inquiries about whether the household had split as part of their getaway approach. 3 months later, Canadian officials found an abandoned shelter in a remote part of British Columbia. Proof indicated the Bishopsons had been dwelling there, but had escaped only days before the discovery. Among the articles left behind was a diary, seemingly belonging to Eleanor, which gave troubling understandings into the household's attitude. "We are not fiends," she had penned. "We are forerunners. History has consistently feared its forward thinkers. Galileo endured persecution for proposing the earth revolves around the sun. We will be proven right when our effort is finished. The barrier between existence and passing is not set, but penetrable. We have glimpsed past it. Soon we will cross it completely and humankind will comprehend. Until that time we must continue our task in darkness." Back in Millbrook, the procedure of mending started gradually and painfully. The Bishopson residence on Willow Lane was eventually demolished after being thoroughly recorded by investigators. In its place, the community created a memorial green space for the casualties, many of whom stayed unidentified despite thorough DNA examination and missing individual database searches. Sheriff Caldwell, troubled by his inability to identify the evil among his community, stepped down the following year. "I grasped Thomas Bishopson's hand hundreds of times," he stated in his concluding press conference. "I gazed into his eyes and observed nothing except kindness. Either he was the most adept deceiver I've ever met, or there's something basically broken in how we understand one another. Whichever it is, I cannot continue this profession any longer. I no longer trust my own judgment." Principal Fletcher put into effect new safety protocols at Millbrook High School, mandating background checks that went beyond standard necessities for all employees and helpers. "We must never permit this to occur again," she insisted. "The Bishopsons weaponized our confidence against us. They used our community's receptiveness as a cover for their corruption. We need to stay a community, but we need to be an alert one." For numerous inhabitants, the mental effect proved overwhelming. Dozens of households relocated in the months following the revelation, unable to keep living in a location now linked with such terror. Those who remained wrestled with suspicion and distrust. Community gatherings, once the highlight of Millbrook's schedule, were poorly attended. People kept to themselves, hesitant to create fresh connections or rely on new arrivals. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who supplied therapy to Millbrook inhabitants, explained the deep injury experienced by the society. What occurred in Millbrook wasn't merely the uncovering of a crime location. It was the shared understanding that everybody's capacity to assess character, to decide who is safe and who isn't, had collapsed catastrophically. It generates a type of injury that questions our most essential beliefs about human relationship. These individuals didn't simply lose their feeling of security. They lost faith in their own perceptions. 5 years after the Bishopsons fled Millbrook, the situation stays unresolved. Global arrest warrants are still in force. Occasional reported sightings emerge from various nations, though none have been definitively confirmed. Some investigators think the family may have changed their looks through surgery and taken on new identities. Others suspect they may have separated to reduce the chance of detection. The most disturbing theory proposed by FBI profilers is that the Bishopsons may have continued their work elsewhere, perhaps with greater caution and more elaborate covers. Abigail and Oliver Bishopson would now be in their 20s, their formative years spent apprenticed to killers, their moral compasses irreparably damaged. The possibility that they might be operating independently, applying the lessons learned from their parents, keeps investigators awake at night. For the residents of Millbrook, the Bishopson case represents more than just a horrific crime. It's a wound in the collective psyche of the community, a fundamental breach of the social contract that binds people together. The town that once prided itself on its openness and trust now grapples with an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the monsters wear the faces of friends. I still catch myself thinking about them with fondness sometimes. Admitted Diane Lewis, Eleanor's former colleague. I'll remember Eleanor comforting a crying child or Thomas staying late to help set up for the school fair. And for a split second, I forget what they really were. Then the reality comes crashing back, and it's like discovering the truth all over again. I don't know if that feeling will ever completely go away. The old well behind the Bishopson house, once a quaint historical feature, has become a symbol of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities. The water that locals once believed had special properties had been contaminated in the most horrific way imaginable. What was once a source of life became a repository of death. As Millbrook continues its slow journey toward recovery, residents have adopted a cautious philosophy summed up by Martha Winters. We can't stop living. We can't stop trusting entirely. But we've learned that trust must be earned slowly, tested thoroughly, and never given blindly. The Bishopsons taught us a terrible lesson, but we're determined not to let it destroy what makes a community worth having in the first place. The case of the Bishopsons serves as a chilling reminder that evil often wears a charming face, that monsters can hide behind acts of generosity and kindness, and that the line between appearance and reality can be dangerously thin. For the people of Millbrook, that reminder is etched into the very ground beneath their feet. In the empty space where a well once stood, and where the darkest secrets of their beloved neighbors were finally brought to light. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Bishopson case is not what was discovered, it's what remains unknown. What was the ultimate purpose of their experiments? Were they motivated solely by scientific curiosity? Or was there something more? And most importantly, where are they now? As the 5th anniversary of their disappearance approaches, these questions loom larger than ever. The FBI has recently reassigned the case to a new task force specializing in long-term fugitives. Agent Melissa Harper, who leads the team, remains cautiously optimistic. Cases like this don't just go cold, she insists. People this distinctive with such specific patterns and needs eventually make mistakes. The Bishopsons require certain chemicals, equipment, and privacy to continue their work. They need to establish identities convincing enough to allow them to integrate into communities. Each of these requirements creates potential points of detection. We're monitoring unusual purchases of preservation chemicals, tracking patterns in missing persons reports worldwide, and maintaining surveillance on individuals who had connections to the family. It's not a question of if they'll be found, but when. Until that day comes, the residents of Millbrook live with uncertainty. Some report nightmares in which they encounter the Bishopsons in other towns, living under new names, but engaging in the same friendly, helpful behaviors that won them Millbrook's trust. Others worry that the family might someday return to exact revenge on those who exposed their secrets. Harold Jenkins, the town historian, has perhaps the most philosophical perspective on the tragedy. Throughout history, communities have faced threats, disease, war, natural disasters. These external dangers often bring people together, strengthening their bonds through shared hardship. But what the Bishopsons did was uniquely destructive because it attacked the community from within. They weaponized our virtues, our openness, our trust, our willingness to welcome strangers. That's a different kind of trauma, one that's harder to heal from. It makes you question not just your safety, but your values. For new residents moving to Millbrook, the Bishopson story is an unavoidable part of the town's identity. Local real estate agents are legally required to disclose the history of the Willow Lane property to potential buyers in the area. The case appears in criminology textbooks and has been the subject of numerous documentaries and true crime podcasts. Visitors sometimes come to see the memorial garden, treating it as a macabre tourist attraction, despite the town council's efforts to discourage such interest. It's frustrating, admits Mayor Caroline Walsh, who took office after the scandal. We're more than this one terrible chapter in our history. Millbrook is still a beautiful town with good people and a strong sense of community. Despite everything that happened, we're working to reclaim our identity, to be known for something more than just being the town that the Bishopsons deceived. This process of reclamation has taken various forms. The town has invested in revitalizing its historic downtown, creating new community traditions to replace those tainted by association with the Bishopsons. The elementary school, where Eleanor volunteered, has been renamed and renovated. The scholarship fund that Thomas established has been repurposed with new criteria and oversight. Yet the shadows linger. On the anniversary of the discovery each year, residents note an unsettling quiet that falls over Millbrook. Businesses close early. Families stay home. The memorial garden receives fresh flowers from anonymous donors. It's a day of collective remembrance and reflection, a pause in the ongoing effort to move forward. For the families of the Bishopsons' victims, moving forward proves even more challenging. Many remain unidentified, their remains unclaimed. For those who have been identified, their loved ones grapple with not only grief, but a particularly disturbing set of questions about their final moments. Lisa Morales, whose brother Miguel was identified as one of the more recent victims found in the well, struggles with these thoughts daily. The medical examiner couldn't tell me if Miguel was dead when they put him in that chemical bath. The idea that he might have been alive, that he might have suffered, that's what haunts me. I want the Bishopsons found not just for justice, but because I need answers. I need to know why they chose my brother, what they did to him, whether he knew what was happening. Without those answers, there's no closure. The psychological profiles developed by FBI analysts offer little comfort to families like the Morales. According to these assessments, the Bishopsons viewed their victims not as people, but as research materials. Their journals showed no recognition of the humanity of those they killed, no acknowledgement of the lives they were destroying or the grief they were causing. In their minds, they were conducting important work that transcended ordinary moral considerations. Explained forensic psychologist Dr. Robert Keller, who consulted on the case. They genuinely believed they were making discoveries that would eventually benefit humanity. This is not unusual in the psychology of certain types of killers. They create elaborate justifications that allow them to compartmentalize their actions. What makes the Bishopsons unique is the degree to which their entire family shared this delusion, reinforcing it among themselves until it became their reality. The investigation into the Bishopsons' background revealed that both Thomas and Eleanor came from troubled families with histories of mental illness. Thomas's father had been institutionalized for paranoid schizophrenia, characterized by religious delusions about resurrection. Eleanor's mother had been a nurse who lost her license after being caught experimenting with unauthorized treatments on patients. Their shared childhood traumas and complementary psychological disturbances created a folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder that they then passed on to their children. It's a tragic cycle. Dr. Keller noted, the children never had a chance to develop normal moral frameworks. From their earliest memories, they were taught that what most of society considers monstrous was actually noble and necessary. By the time they were teenagers, they were fully indoctrinated into their parents' worldview. This understanding of the family's psychology has implications for the ongoing manhunt. If the Bishopsons truly believe in the importance of their work, they are unlikely to have abandoned it despite the risks. Their delusion would compel them to continue, perhaps with greater secrecy and caution, but with the same underlying purpose. In recent months, investigators have begun exploring a new angle based on this psychological assessment. Rather than focusing solely on the Bishopsons themselves, they are monitoring scientific publications and online forums related to experimental preservation techniques, life extension research, and fringe theories about death and consciousness. The Bishopsons' journals revealed they occasionally published aspects of their research under pseudonyms on obscure academic platforms, carefully disguising the true nature of their experiments. It's their chills heal. Agent Harper explained, their need for validation, for recognition of their work, even if it comes from the fringes of the scientific community. Ego often undermines even the most careful criminals, and the Bishopsons have very specific intellectual vanities that might lead them to take risks they otherwise wouldn't. This approach yielded a potential breakthrough in early 2023, when a paper published in a non-reviewed online journal caught the attention of the FBI's analytical team. The article, authored by T. Wilford, entitled Novel Applications of Phenol Derivatives in Biological Preservation, contained methodological descriptions strikingly similar to techniques documented in the Bishopsons' journals. Linguistic analysis suggested an 87% probability that Thomas Bishopson was the author. The paper had been submitted from an IP address in Argentina, leading to an intensive search operation in the region around Buenos Aires. Though the Bishopsons themselves were not located, investigators discovered an apartment that had been rented under one of their known aliases until just 2 months prior. Neighbors described a middle-aged couple who kept to themselves, but were unfailingly polite when encountered. They had claimed to be Canadian researchers on sabbatical. We were close, Agent Harper acknowledged. Not close enough, but it confirms our theory that they're continuing their activities and maintaining some connection to academic or pseudo-academic circles. It's only a matter of time before they make another mistake. For the residents of Millbrook, these developments bring mixed emotions. The possibility of the Bishopsons' capture offers potential closure, but also resurrects painful memories and forces the community to confront a history many would prefer to forget. Part of me wants them found so they can face justice, said Roger Wilson, their former neighbor. But another part dreads the trial that would follow, the media circus having to relive everything, having our town's name dragged through the news cycle again. It's selfish, I know, especially considering the victims' families who deserve answers, but it's honest. As Millbrook approaches the 5-year mark since the discovery in the well, the town stands at a crossroads. The physical scars have largely healed. The Bishopson house is gone, replaced by the serene memorial garden. The property has been regraded with no visible sign of where the well once stood. But the psychological wounds remain tender, easily reopened by reminders of what happened there. Dr. Chen, who continues to work with affected community members, sees gradual progress. Healing from community trauma follows a different timeline than individual trauma. She observed, it requires collective processing, shared narratives, and the rebuilding of trust networks. Millbrook is doing that work slowly but surely. People are learning to trust again, but with a wisdom they didn't have before. It's not the same innocent trust they once had. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps that's growth. The town's annual festivals have resumed, though with subtle differences. Background checks for vendors and volunteers are now standard practice. Security cameras monitor public spaces. New residents find themselves subtly scrutinized before being fully embraced by the community. Trust is extended more cautiously, built over time rather than given freely. Yet, amid these changes, moments of the old Millbrook spirit occasionally emerge. When a fire destroyed the Wilson family home last winter, neighbors rallied to provide temporary housing, clothing, and essentials. When Hurricane Elsa caused flooding in the lower part of town, residents formed volunteer teams to help with cleanup and repairs. The capacity for collective action, for community support in times of crisis, remains intact despite the betrayal that shook its foundations. We're learning to distinguish between healthy trust and blind trust, explained Mayor Walsh. Healthy trust includes verification, appropriate boundaries, and mutual accountability. It's actually stronger than the blind trust we once had, because it's based on genuine knowledge of one another, rather than assumptions or wishful thinking. For younger residents who were children when the Bishopson case broke, the impact has been formative. Millbrook High School now includes a curriculum unit on critical thinking and media literacy, teaching students to question appearances and verify information. The annual Ethics Symposium, established in the wake of the tragedy, brings speakers to discuss moral decision-making and the responsibilities of community membership. These kids are growing up with a different perspective, noted Principal Fletcher. They're more cautious, yes, but also more thoughtful about what it means to be part of a community. They understand in a way their parents didn't that maintaining a healthy community requires active participation and vigilance, not just good intentions. As darkness falls over Millbrook each night, lights shine from windows along tree-lined streets. Families gather for dinner. Neighbors chat across fences, and life continues its steady rhythm. The town that loved the Bishopsons has been forever changed by what was found in the well behind their home. But it has not been destroyed. In the memorial garden where the house once stood, a simple stone bears an inscription chosen by a committee of residents after much deliberation. It reads, "For those lost, for lessons learned, for a community that endures." No names are listed. Not the Bishopsons, not their victims. The absence of names represents both the unidentified dead and the unresolved nature of the tragedy itself. Visitors to the garden often comment on its peaceful atmosphere, at odds with the horrors that occurred on the site. Wildflowers bloom in carefully planned disarray. A small pond reflects the changing sky. Benches offer places for contemplation. It is a space transformed, where darkness has been acknowledged, but not allowed to dominate. As Agent Harper and her team continue their search for the Bishopsons, as families of victims wait for answers, and as Millbrook works to redefine itself beyond the shadow of tragedy, the case remains a cautionary tale about the masks people wear and the secrets they keep. It reminds us that evil rarely announces itself, that it often hides behind smiles and good deeds, and that the boundary between normality and monstrosity can be thinner than we care to admit. The well behind the Bishopson home has been filled in, sealed over, erased from the landscape, but the questions it raised continue to echo through Millbrook and beyond. How well do we know our neighbors? What lies beneath the surface of the communities we build? And how do we move forward when trust has been so fundamentally betrayed? For the people of Millbrook, there are no easy answers, only the daily work of rebuilding. not just their community, but their faith in one another and in their own judgment. It is work they approach with newfound caution, but also with determination, knowing that to abandon it would be to surrender to the darkness the Bishopsons brought into their midst. As twilight settles over the memorial garden, Harold Jenkins often sits on his favorite bench, watching the last light fade from the sky. History isn't just what happened, he reflects. It's what we choose to remember and how we choose to tell the story. Millbrook's story includes the Bishopsons. Now, we can't change that. But it doesn't end with them. We get to write the next chapters. And that's what matters most. In those next chapters, Millbrook seeks not to forget the past, but to learn from it, to grow beyond it, to ensure that no future family will ever be loved so blindly or trusted so completely as the Bishopsons were. It is a hard-earned wisdom, paid for in blood and tears, but it is wisdom nonetheless. And somewhere, perhaps closer than anyone realizes, the Bishopsons continue their dark work, moving through the world like sharks beneath the surface of calm waters. Their legacy in Millbrook serves as a warning to communities everywhere. Look deeper, question more, trust but verify. For sometimes the monsters are not strangers lurking in shadows. They are the neighbors you welcome with open arms, the friends who sit at your table, the beloved family whose secrets remain hidden until the well runs dry. As for the Bishopsons themselves, if they were to read this account, they would likely view it through the distorted lens of their shared delusion. They would see themselves not as villains, but as misunderstood visionaries, their work not as atrocity, but as necessary sacrifice for a greater purpose only they can perceive. Such is the nature of the most dangerous kind of evil, the kind that believes with absolute conviction in its own righteousness. The search continues. The victims wait for justice, and Millbrook endures, forever changed by the family it once loved, and the secrets that lay hidden beneath their feet all along. The search for the Bishopsons continues to this day, a constant reminder that justice remains elusive for the families of their victims. The FBI maintains an active file, with Agent Harper reviewing incoming tips and potential sightings weekly. International law enforcement agencies keep the Bishopsons on their watch lists, though the trail has gone frustratingly cold since the discovery in Argentina. Some criminologists speculate that the family may have separated to reduce their visibility. It's entirely possible that Thomas and Eleanor are operating independently from their children now, suggested criminal profiler Dr. Vanessa Torres. The children, now adults, would have been thoroughly indoctrinated into their parents' belief system, but might implement it differently, perhaps less cautiously due to their youth. This creates multiple threat vectors that are harder to track simultaneously. This theory gained credibility when in late 2023, a small private laboratory in Seattle was found abandoned after a routine fire inspection revealed concerning modifications to the building's ventilation system. The laboratory had been leased to a young woman using identification that was later determined to be fraudulent. Surveillance footage showed an individual whose physical characteristics were consistent with an aged-up version of Abigail Bishopson, though facial recognition results were inconclusive due to the subject's careful avoidance of camera angles. The Seattle laboratory contained equipment consistent with preservation experiments. Agent Harper confirmed. The techniques had evolved from what we documented in Millbrook, but the underlying methodology showed clear continuity. Most concerning was evidence suggesting recent human tissue testing, though no victims were located on the premises. This discovery prompted a nationwide alert to chemical supply companies, medical equipment distributors, and property management firms, asking them to report suspicious purchases or rental applications. matching specific patterns associated with the Bishopsons' known behaviors. The initiative has generated dozens of leads, though none have yet resulted in apprehensions. For Millbrook resident Beatrice Hammond, who still lives next door to the memorial garden that replaced the Bishopson home, vigilance has become a way of life. "I used to be embarrassed about how suspicious I've become," she admitted. "I keep detailed notes about new people who move into the neighborhood. I notice patterns: who has unusual deliveries, whose schedule seems irregular, who declines invitations to enter their home. But I'm not ashamed anymore. Being observant isn't the same as being paranoid. It's just being responsible." Hammond's attitude reflects a broader shift in Millbrook's approach to community building. The town now balances openness with awareness, hospitality with healthy boundaries. New residents still receive welcome baskets and invitations to community events. But the unconditional trust that once characterized Millbrook has been replaced by something more measured, more mature. "We used to pride ourselves on accepting people at face value," explained Mayor Walsh. "Now we understand that true community safety requires deeper engagement. Not just accepting what people show you, but taking the time to truly know them. It's actually led to more meaningful connections in many ways, even if they develop more slowly." The Millbrook case has become required study at the FBI Academy, with particular emphasis on how predators exploit the social dynamics of small towns. The Bishopsons' method of infiltrating communities through apparent generosity and civic engagement has been documented as a sophisticated form of grooming, not just of individual victims, but of entire social systems. What the Bishopsons did in Millbrook was essentially create a community-wide blind spot, explained FBI Instructor Special Agent Marcus Reynolds. They positioned themselves as such positive contributors that questioning their behavior became almost taboo. They weren't just hiding their activities. They were actively constructing a social environment in which they were above suspicion. It's a level of manipulation we rarely see executed so effectively. Law enforcement agencies across the country now provide training to local police departments on recognizing this pattern of community grooming and establishing protocols for vetting even the most seemingly benevolent new residents. Sheriff's departments in rural areas receive particular attention given the vulnerability of isolated communities to this type of infiltration. Jim Caldwell, Millbrook's former sheriff, who retired after the case broke, has found a new purpose in consulting on these training programs. "I couldn't continue wearing the badge after missing what was happening right under my nose," he said. "But I can use my experience to help other law enforcement officers avoid the same mistakes." The Bishopsons were masters of deception. But there were signs, subtle inconsistencies, explanations that were just a little too neat, patterns of behavior that should have raised questions. I'm teaching officers to look for those signs without becoming cynical or undermining the community trust that's essential to effective policing. For the victims' families, these educational efforts provide small comfort in the absence of justice. Miguel Morales' sister, Lisa, has channeled her grief into advocacy, founding an organization called Never Again that pushes for more thorough background checks and monitoring of chemical purchases. The group also maintains a database of missing persons cases that match the Bishopsons' victim profile, working to identify potential connections that might otherwise be missed across jurisdictional boundaries. "The hardest part is knowing they're still out there," Lisa said. "Probably still killing, still experimenting, still believing in whatever twisted purpose drives them. Every time I hear about an unidentified body or a missing person who fits the pattern, I wonder if it's them. I wonder if another family is about to experience what mine did. The psychological impact on Millbrook's children has been a particular concern for parents and educators. Many who were young when the case broke are now teenagers. Their understanding of trust and community, shaped by the knowledge of what happened on Willow Lane. School counselor Rachel Bennett has observed the effects firsthand. These kids grew up with the Bishopson case as part of their town's identity, she noted. Some respond with heightened anxiety about strangers. Others show a precocious skepticism about people's motives. We're working to help them develop healthy caution without cynicism, to understand that what happened was an extreme outlier, not the norm for human behavior. The high school's ethics curriculum now includes discussions about moral responsibility within communities, examining questions like when should you report concerning behavior? How do you balance respect for privacy with collective safety? What obligations do community members have toward one another? These conversations, difficult but necessary, are part of Millbrook's effort to equip the next generation with tools to prevent history from repeating itself. In the Memorial Garden, a new addition appeared on the 5th anniversary of the discovery. A small reflection pool surrounded by stones bearing messages from community members. Some express grief, others anger. Many contain promises to remember, to remain vigilant, to protect one another. It has become a tradition for Millbrook residents to visit the pool on significant dates, adding new stones or simply sitting in contemplation. It's part of our healing process, explained Dr. Chen, acknowledging the trauma collectively, expressing the complex emotions it generates, and recommitting to the values that define us despite what happened here. These rituals might seem small, but they're powerful tools for community resilience. As night falls over Millbrook, lights glow from windows along quiet streets. Families gather for dinner. Neighbors check in on one another, and life continues its steady rhythm. The town has been changed by what was found in the well behind the Bishopson home, made more cautious, perhaps, but also more intentional in how it builds and maintains community bonds. The old well itself has been completely erased from the landscape, filled in and covered over with layers of concrete, before the Memorial Garden was created. But somewhere beneath the peaceful surface, its memory remains. A reminder of darkness hidden beneath an idyllic facade, of evil that wore the mask of kindness, of secrets kept until the waters rose and brought them inevitably to light. For investigators like Agent Harper, the case represents unfinished business, a puzzle still missing crucial pieces, a hunt without its quarry. For victims' families like the Morales, it represents an open wound that cannot heal without closure. For Millbrook residents, it represents both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience, to the human capacity to rebuild trust even after its most catastrophic betrayal. And for the Bishopsons themselves, wherever they may be, it represents merely an interruption, a setback in what they perceive as their great work, their deluded quest to breach the boundary between life and death through the most unthinkable means. In their journals, Thomas had written of setbacks before, of relocations necessitated by small minds, of the burden of vision misunderstood by society. Their pathology suggests they view themselves not as fugitives, but as pioneers forced underground by a world not ready for their discoveries. This perspective makes them all the more dangerous, driven not by impulse or passion, but by unwavering conviction in their purpose. It is what allowed them to maintain their facade in Millbrook for years, to compartmentalize their research from their community personas, to engage in acts of exceptional cruelty while simultaneously performing acts of apparent kindness. The most dangerous people, Dr. Keller observed, or those who have constructed a moral framework in which their worst actions are justified, even necessary. The Bishopsons believe they are working towards something transcendent, some breakthrough that would transform human understanding of life and death. This belief system allows them to view their victims not as people, but as stepping stones toward that goal. And that makes them uniquely resistant to doubt, remorse, or the kind of mistakes that typically lead to capture in cases like this. Despite these challenges, Agent Harper remains determined. Her office wall displays a map marked with possible Bishopson sightings, supply chain analysis of chemicals used in their preservation techniques, and profiles of missing persons who match their victim selection patterns. It is painstaking work, following threads that often lead nowhere, but she approaches it with methodical persistence. "Cases like this don't solve themselves," she said. "They're solved through attention to detail, through recognizing patterns across seemingly unrelated data points, through maintaining focus even when leads go cold." The Bishopsons have been exceptionally careful, but no one can maintain perfect vigilance forever. They'll make a mistake, and when they do, we'll be ready. Until that day comes, Millbrook continues its journey of recovery. Not back to what it was before, but forward to something new. A community transformed by trauma, but not defined by it. A town that loved the Bishopsons until the well ran dry, now learning to love itself again, scars and all. "We don't talk about getting back to normal," Mayor Walsh explained. "There's no going back to what Millbrook was before. Instead, we talk about building something stronger, a community that's both warm and wise, both welcoming and watchful." The Bishopsons exploited our trust, but they don't get to destroy it. That's a choice we make every day in how we relate to one another and how we rebuild what was broken. As dawn breaks over the memorial garden, dew glistens on wildflowers planted where the well once stood. Life continues. The search goes on, and Millbrook stands as both a warning and a promise, a reminder of humanity's vulnerability to deception and its capacity for resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The story of the town that loved the Bishopsons is not yet complete. The final chapter awaits writing, the chapter of justice, of closure, of answers to questions that still haunt victims, families, and investigators alike. Until then, the lessons of Millbrook echo beyond its boundaries, a cautionary tale for communities everywhere about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most perfect seeming neighbors. And somewhere the Bishopsons continue their dark work, moving through the world like wolves in sheep's clothing, their true nature hidden behind carefully constructed personas. The well behind their Millbrook home has been filled, their secrets exposed, but their ultimate purpose remains obscured. A darkness still waiting to be brought fully into the light. This has been the town that loved the Bishopsons until the well behind their home was emptied. Thank you for joining us on the Ghastly Journal. Remember to subscribe for more tales from the shadows. And until next time, keep your eyes open, for sometimes the most frightening monsters are hiding in plain sight.